go ahead and try these 3 questions from an ACT science section from one of the conflicting viewpoints passages. So go ahead and try 1, 2, and 3. Your first task when you do a conflicting viewpoints passage is to read through the passage and get the basic idea of how the 2 scientists or 3 scientists or whatever, how they differ about a particular topic. That's the first step because often the questions you're going to see are related to that difference. In what ways do they differ? Where do they disagree? And so on. Now, I picked the 2 of the questions here, 2 and 3 in particular, because you have questions sometimes where they ask actually how they agree. Because just because, in this case, scientists wanted to disagree about where these meteor craters are going, just because they disagree doesn't mean that they don't have things in common. They don't have points that they both agree on. And that's what 2 and 3 actually go into, but they're shared assumptions, they're shared beliefs, not just the disagreements. Let's do number 1 first, because this is more of a general question that's going to tackle the main difference, really, between the 2 passages. And then we will take a look at numbers 2 and 3. So for 1, which of the following best describes how the 2 scientists explain how craters are removed from Europa's surface? So by the time we would have done this question, we would have read through everything. So I'm just going to read through the pieces that we need to answer a question like this. So what I do here, since we've got 2 different parts to this choice, scientist 1 and then scientist 2, let's read scientist 1 again, find the answer to scientist 1, eliminate what doesn't work, and maybe that'll get us the answer right away. If not, we go to scientist 2, we read, and we double check which one fits both. So let's read Scientist 1, which explains how the craters are removed from Europa's surface. Let's see. A deep ocean of liquid water exists on Europa. Jupiter's gravitational field produces tides within Europa that can cause heating of the subsurface to a point where liquid water can exist. The numerous cracks and dark bands in the surface ice closely resemble the appearance of thawing ice covering the polar oceans on Earth. Only a substantial amount of circulating liquid water can crack and rotate such large slabs of ice. The few meteorite craters that exist are shallow and have been smoothed by liquid water that oozed up into the crater from the subsurface and then quickly froze. So there we go. There is our evidence, right? That is what smooths out these craters, or what removes these craters. It's liquid water coming up into the surface from the subsurface, freezing and filling in those holes. So going to the choices, sublimation, not mentioned, if not mentioned in this paragraph either. Worn smooth by wind, not mentioned in any part of that scientist 1 account. The only one that works here is B, and we're done. We can confirm that scientist 2 believes it's sublimation. We can see that discussion here, but we don't have to because we've eliminated A, C, and D. So very straightforward type question. So how about 2? According to the information provided, which of the following descriptions of Europa would be accepted by both scientists? So one of the things you can do, there's kind of 2 ways to go about doing these questions. Depends on where the answer is going to be. Sometimes you have to read through Scientist 1 and Scientist 2 and infer what they have in common. So see what their arguments are, see what they both assume to be true, and then find that assumption in the choices. Other times, such as this case, you can actually look at the preamble, the information in the beginning of the passage before you get into the 2 scientist viewpoints, because this often tells you what the boundaries of the problem are, or what the shared information is between them, what they agree on. And then the discussions in Scientist 1 and 2, we'll talk about then what they disagree. And that's what we see here. So the question wants to know which of the following would be accepted by both scientists. And we see in this introductory paragraph that unmanned spacecraft taking images of Jupiter's moon Europa have found its surface to be very smooth with few meteorite craters. Europa's surface ice shows evidence of being continually resmoothed and reshaped. Cracks, dark bands, and pressure ridges created when water or slush is squeezed up between 2 slabs of ice are commonly seen in images of the surface. 2 scientists expressed their views as to whether the presence of a deep ocean beneath the surface is responsible for Europa's surface features. So this right here is the difference. This is where the argument comes in, whether or not there's a deep ocean beneath the surface, but they both agree on all this other stuff. And if we look at the choices, we look at choice J, notice that's exactly what we see here. They both assume and agree that there is surface ice. And they do talk about ice on the surface as well if you read more into Scientist 1 and Scientist 2. But we can see in the shared information they both agree on that. So that's why we can pick choice J. F, I don't think they say anything else about I mean, I think it's the case that Jupiter actually has a larger diameter than Europa, so it's just false. But regardless of that, neither of them really talk about diameters of the planets and the moons. So F just is not supported anywhere. G, Europa has a surface made of rocky material. It's contradicted by the passage. Europa has a surface temperature of 20 degrees Celsius. I don't know where this 20 degrees thing is coming from. I've seen it in other questions, but I think there was in other questions. But in any event, it's not mentioned anywhere in the passages, so we go with choice J. So now let's look at number 3. With which of the following statements about the conditions on Europa or the evolution of Europa's surface would both scientist 1 and scientist 2 most likely agree? So this is a question where, again, we want to find their agreement. But here we're going to have to go into the scientist discussions themselves and try to see where the common ideas are. So what they both agree on. So we want to know what would they agree about the conditions of Europa or the evolution of the surface. So what would they say about the surface of Europa? Well, in 1, what do we see? We saw this before. Again, you've got these slabs of ice. You've got this a lot of water underneath that's rotating the slabs of ice. And through the cracks, water comes up and fills in the holes, fills in the craters. What do we have in 2? No deep liquid water ocean exists on Europa. The heat generated by gravitational tides is quickly lost to space because of Europa's small size, as shown by its very low surface temperature. Many of the features on Europa's surface resemble features created by flowing glaciers on Earth. Large amounts of liquid water are not required for the creation of these features. If a thin layer of ice below the surface is much warmer than the surface ice, it may be able to flow and cause cracking and movement of the surface ice. Few meteorite craters are observed because of Europa's very thin atmosphere. Surface ice continually sublimes, changes from solid to gas, into this atmosphere, quickly eroding and removing any craters that may have formed. So what are they both saying about the surface? Well, they both agree that the surface of Europa is covered with thick, deep slabs of ice. Both of them agree that the ice is moving, right? Here they're being rotated. Here it's just moving because of this thin layer of ice beneath the surface. They disagree on whether or not there's a reservoir of an ocean underneath these slabs of ice, but more or less they agree on everything else. So let's see. The surface of Europa is being shaped by the movement of ice. Yeah, both of them talk about the movement of ice. That looks pretty good. Is covered with millions of meteorite craters. No, the whole point of this passage is to talk about why there are so few craters. What are the features of the surface that are smoothing those out? So B is contradicted. Surface of Europa is the same temperature as the surface of the Arctic Ocean on Earth. Well, that doesn't make any sense because they tell us the surface temperature is really, really low. And they don't really mention anything about the Arctic Ocean on Earth anyway, so C is gone. D, has remained unchanged for millions of years. No, they haven't said anything like that. Just the opposite. Again, it's constantly shifting, constantly moving. Meteorite craters are being smoothed out, so it's not remaining unchanged. So we go with choice A. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.